Shopping Mall, Death Spa, Brain Scan, although that might not have been in the 80s. Maybe, I don't know. Return of the Living Dead. Um, I'm a kid of the 80s. I grew up in the 80s and I spent a lot of time watching movies from the 80s. And as I got older and I spent a lot more time at the video store, I definitely gorged myself on not just sci-fi, but in general, 80s genre films from horror, sci-fi, action. And looking back on those films, a fair share of them won't hold up to today's standards of storytelling and filmmaking because I guess it's at a time where people weren't all that concerned about quality and were more concerned about just being entertained in general. And a lot of films, like for example, Shopping Mall, which I'm not saying is a horrible film, is actually a pretty entertaining film. It's just has a crazy conceit about security guard robots that go run amok in a mall and go on a killing spree. And films like I know this came out in the late '70s, but a movie like Killdozer, where a bulldozer is either struck by lightning or comes in contact with a meteor and just starts killing people. It becomes sentient and just starts running people over. It's films like that from the '80s had so many different tropes like nonsensical transitions, scenes just existing just for the sake of it existing that really serves no point or purpose in moving plots along, and other little tropes like that the '80s are known for: bad acting, bad visual effects, and stuff like that. I mean, I like another one just popped into my head, like Shakma, the one about the killer orangutan, or rather, sorry, baboon. Although I think that might have been the '90s, but or Alligator. Okay, Alligator. Yeah, movies like that. And like I said, '80s films were very much part of my childhood, and I could totally sit down right now and just kick back and relax and watch something like Night of the Creeps or something like that. And that will put me back in the right mindset for an '80s movie. Now, James Cox film Ctrl Alt Delete is about a trio of hacktivists who want to infiltrate a security firm and get the encrypted data found within. And meanwhile, employees are still within the building who are now currently messing around with a new computer called Mana, and soon they discover that they are now in the clutches of that computer as it begins to strike back. And that sounds like a very much a plot from a film from the '80s, but since we're watching this and seeing this in the 21st century, you kind of watch it with 21st century eyes, expecting a pretty straightforward film about that with little flourishes here and there. I mean, as the film progresses, I mean, there were plenty of '80s references abound, but I immediately was not making that '80s connection. I mean, I appreciate all the references and I thought it was entertaining, but as the film was unfolding, I'm like asking 21st century film viewer questions like, what does that have to do with anything? Why are we focusing on that? Shouldn't it be focusing on this? It's like, what is the purpose of these characters? And legitimate questions that us as a viewing audience would probably ask as we're watching a movie. And for a period, I was like, yeah, okay, this isn't all that great. But as I was watching the film and taking in the story, and I found myself thinking about other '80s films, like as I mentioned, Chopping Mall or Shakma, and suddenly it just clicked on me. I'm like thinking back on the events. I can't remember at what point in the film it was at when it just clicked on me. Clicked my head just switched gears. That I'm like, I'm watching an '80s movie. This is this 21st century film is structured and being presented like a film made in the '80s, a film that you would find at the video store on VHS in like in a box from like Media Home Entertainment, or Gorgon Video or something like that, or Vestron. And as soon as that registered and clicked, I totally got the film. And I'm not saying that this is just classics. This is not a classic by any means. This is not like obviously this is not Shakespeare, but Cox's intention, albeit it wasn't clear to me right away, was to make a 80s science fiction action horror fantasy adventure film, and he succeeds in spades in doing that, more so than other filmmakers. Without even giving a title, there was a film, like horror film, that came out recently that was supposed to harken back to the horror movies of the 80s and 90s, and basically the people who made this movie had no concept of what 80s and 90s horror movies were like, because it was the movie that they presented was crap. And later I discovered that these guys actually never seen a single 80s, 90s horror movie. So yeah, fail. But I'm not sure. I'm sure Cox has seen his fair share of 80s films. And in the end, although the fact that I didn't catch on to it right away, this homage to 80s horror science fiction films works. As long as you look at it through the eyes of someone who from the 80s. And if you're not born in the 80s or from the 80s, it's like, just give yourself a primer. I mean, I'm sure you can find many 80s films on Netflix and YouTube. And then let that warm you up. And then check out Ctrl Alt Delete. You'll find even greater appreciation for it than I initially started watching it. And if that didn't click right away, watching it again afterwards, knowing what it was, I actually found myself enjoying it even more. So James B. Cox's homage to 80s sci-fi action films is, I would give 4 stars out of 5. The film itself, if you take away that 80s filter, yeah, I probably would give it like a 2 stars or a 2.5 stars out of 5, only because, yeah, there are like so many things I had issue with for the film as a film itself. But because, like I said, this is an 80s movie, it works. So, James B. Cox's Ctrl Alt Delete. Definitely check it out when you have the chance. 4 stars out of 5. It'll definitely take you back to the 80s, and probably might even make you want to watch some 80s films at this very moment, which I actually now, after talking about it, I do feel like doing. So, Ctrl Alt Delete. 4 stars out of 5. If you like this review, hit that like button below. What were your favorite 80s sci-fi action horror films? Have you heard of Ctrl Alt Delete? Please let me know in the comments below. And if you haven't already subscribed to my channel, please do, so you can stay on top of my reviews as they come in. So until next time, we'll see you at the video store.